Hi, Dave Scotland for cgswot.com, and today we're going to take a look at a bullet hole effect. But as per usual with our tutorials, it's not always the end effect that we're left with is the purpose of the tutorial. The purpose of this tutorial is to really show you some of the power that you can gain by using mask shapes to drive the emitter position of a particle effect, and also how to get those mask shapes from text objects or shape objects, and then how to use that mask shape information as a position information for an emitter or a light or an object in After Effects. So there's a lot of techniques that we're going to go through in this tutorial that really are handy in a bunch of other uses other than this specific example. But this is the effect that we're shooting for. Pardon the pun. So as you can see, we've got bullet holes punching through this steel plate, and I've also got a background image out on the other side, as if we're inside a sort of a steel container or inside a barn or something like that. And we've got bullet holes punching through, and then I've also got some light streaks shining through those bullet holes from the outside. And the other main thing that you might notice is that those bullet holes are in the shape of a specific mask, or in this instance text. So that's what we're shooting for, and we'll get started. So all I've got in the comp here, this is just a blank After Effects project. I've got my background image, just an image I got off Google Images, and I've also got my texture. And once again, it's just an image I got off Google Images. So to start with, we need to create a new composition. So just go Composition, New Composition, and we're going to call this one say Bullet Effect, and 72405 is what I'll be using. Square pixels, 25 frames, and 8 seconds long is going to be long enough for us, and I'll go OK to that. So there's our new comp, nothing in the timeline. And we can go ahead and bring our background down and just resize our background image, and I'll just pull this off to the side a little bit, give ourselves a little bit more real estate. So just resize some sort of background image there. We really won't be seeing much of it. And the next thing we need to do is we might just go ahead and quickly create our particle system. Normally you wouldn't need to do this until after you've got sort of the animation data extrapolated from the masks, and we'll be going ahead, we'll be doing that in just a moment. But by creating the particle effect first, we'll be able to assess the timing a little better, and you'll know what I mean as we move forward. So let's just go Layer, New, Solid, and we'll call this we'll go bullet holes, and make comp size is fine, and I tend to make my particular solids in black. We'll go OK to that, and I'm going to create a new effect just in the effects panel here. I'm just going to right click with the bullet holes layer selected, right click, come down to trap code and particular, and I'll just hide that background, and you can see we've got our particles emanating from the center there, and that's all we need for now. What I will do is just quickly, the size is fine for them, we can always tweak that later on, but just in the particles I'm just going to take the feather off the spheres in the shape there, and I'll also just kick the life out beyond the length of the comp. In this instance it's 8 seconds, so I'll just make it 9 seconds, and that way our particles will last throughout the whole comp. And the last thing we need to do in here in preparation is just in the emitter settings, we're just going to take the velocity out. So we'll just go 0 on the velocity, 0 velocity random, and 0 velocity from emitter. So that should be fine now. You'll see now that we just have a solid dot in the center because there's no movement of the emitter. So the next thing we need to do is create our text. So we're just going to click on our text tool, click somewhere in the center here, and just type in some simple text. And I'm just going to reposition it to the center here a little bit, and that's fine. Now you'll notice I've used a very blocky shape, and for the purpose of the tutorial, given that we're going to be extrapolating a mask from this text, it just helps to have a very simple shape rather than using a font that's got a lot of curls and swirls and that sort of stuff. So we can highlight our CG Swot text now once you're happy with the positioning of it and the size, and we're just going to go Layer, Create Masks from Text, and straight away it hides our initial CG Swot, and we can even delete that, and we were left with a solid. That operation we just did created a white solid and created masks to inevitably give us the same shape that we had from our text. So if I just bring the mask properties up, you'll see now that we have a mask for the C, a mask for the G, S, W, and 2 masks for O and T. Now the reason for 2 masks is it's got an outer mask and it's also got an inner mask. And if you had a P or a capital B, then you will find that you will get a few extra masks in order to maintain that shape. So what we're going to do is take the mask path information, we're going to Control C, copy it, and paste it onto the position of a null object. And so we're just going to go Layer, New, and we'll go Null Object, and we'll rename, hit Enter and rename the null object. We'll call it Path Position. And if we just highlight that and hit P, we can bring up our position parameters. And with the CG Swot solid here with the masks on it, we're going to highlight the C mask path. And with that highlighted, we're going to go Control C to copy, and at frame, making sure we're at frame 0, we're going to highlight the position and go Control V to paste. Now you'll see that it's created a whole bunch of new keyframes, and we now have a null object moving around the path. And this is a very powerful process, because that means basically you can tie the position of something to the path of something else and extrapolate that path from, say, text or object movement, and there's a bunch of options there. So 2 seconds is a little long. So what we're going to do is come back to about 1 second on the timeline, and with all of the keyframes selected up here in the timeline, actually before we even do that, what we're going to do is I'm just going to twirl down that outlines, that CG Swot outlines there, and I'm going to hide that layer. I'm going to bring up my bullet holes effect, particular emitter, and that gives me my position in the XY here in the emitter. And what I'm going to do is Alt click on position XY, which brings up an expression box, and we're going to use the pick whip to pick whip up to the position of the null object. And now you'll see that our path is creating, I'll come up a little bit here, our path is creating the emitter position for that first path that we've put in there. Now the reason why I connected it up now is that we can really see how the effect's working and the timing of this this path position here, because we're going to do a little bit of keyframe sort of stretching here in a moment. So what we need to do is just with our bullet effects, our bullet holes particular effect here happening, we're just going to decrease the amount of bullet holes until we get something that we like, something that's a little bit random, and that's looking pretty good for now. We can always come back and do a little bit of adjustment on the particles per second, and so that's going to work nicely. And our particles, they're going to be fine for now. So we can just twirl that up, and the next thing we need to do is select all of the keyframes for that first C shape in the path position null, and then we're going to bring up our graph editor. And if we select all of the keyframes in the graph editor, that gives us this outer box. I'm just going to slide this up a little bit. I'm just going to get rid of hide the parent. Just gives a bit more space down in here. And that gives us this outer selection box. And you'll see that I can stretch out, stretch in. And what we want to do is stretch it in to about 1 second. And that's going to be fine there. And now what you'll see is our particles are emitting for the C over 1 second. And so if we come to that 1 second mark and just highlight our bullet holes again, we can just bring that amount up again, just so that we get something nice and random. That's going to do it fine. So there's our C, and now we need to just replicate that process again of copying the path. So bring up the G, and we'll also go back to, we'll jump out of graph view, and we'll slide our view in a little bit so we can see what we're doing. And we're going to come through to that, I might even just tidy this up a little bit. Grab all of your keyframes, come into the graph again, and just make sure that you're at that 1 second mark, and that's fine there. So now with the G mask path, we're going to go Control C to copy, and then we're going to highlight the position in the null, Control V to paste, and that's given us our G. And we need to do with them all selected, all of those keyframes we've just copied. What we need to do is bring up our graph editor again, and you'll see that automatically it's created that box around there, and we're going to slide that in there. We also might just make sure that we're right on that 2 second point. And that's it there. And we'll just have a look at how that's working up here in our comp. So the null moves around the G, and it's going to work nicely. So we'll do I'll do one more letter, and then I'll jump ahead and show you what it looks like with all of the letters done. So I won't put you through having to wait for that. So we'll jump back now. We'll make sure that we're on that keyframe there, and we'll highlight the S, mask path, Control C, highlight position, Control V. And you'll notice we've got a bit of a gap there, and you'll see that the bullets come across, the bullet holes come across like that. Now I think we need to get rid of that gap a little bit. So we'll just undo that a bit. We'll select all of these keyframes out here, and we're just going to bring those back something like that. I'll just zoom in here a little bit. I think that's going to be fine. And with them all selected again, we're going to bring up our graph editor. We're just going to bring the scale of those keyframes into the 3-second mark there. We'll just give that another. Just scrubbing through, making sure it's working okay. Come back out of graph editor there. We could probably grab everything up here and just, whoop. And that's just by clicking on that keyframe. It's sort of fixed that problem up. Okay, so that's the process of getting the masks up into that position. And I'm gonna jump ahead now and go ahead and do that and show you what it looks like once we've got all of our masks there. And you will also notice it's a little bit hard to see what's happening here. You can hide the null, and that will get rid of that red outline and just show you the bullet holes that we need. So I'll go ahead and do the rest of those letters now and show you what it looks like. Okay, so that's all of the letters done now, and I'll just RAM preview that for you. So we've got the C, G, S, W, O, T. Now you will notice as you go through that process that some letters may end up with too many dots and the shape becomes a little bit too rigid, and all you do is tighten the amount of keyframes for that letter in closer in the graph editor. And if there's not enough dots to maintain the shape of the letter, you pull the amount of dots for that letter out further apart from one another. Okay, so that's the bullet hole emitter process done. So we can now get rid of our CG Swot outlines. You know, most people would just probably delete it, but you can, just in case, just drag it to the very bottom underneath your background and switch it off, just in case you need to go back to it at a later stage. You can always delete it once you're happy with the timing and how everything's looking later. So grab bullet holes, the particular layer, and the path position, highlight both of those, and we're just going to go layer, pre-compose, and move all attributes, tick, untick open new composition, and we're just going to call this bullet holes comp. We'll go bullet holes pre-comp and go OK. And so now we have that pre-comp, we can use that for a couple of different purposes. So the next thing when we're going to do is I'm going to create, first of all, let's bring our texture for the metal, for the steel in, and we're just going to put it above our background layer, and we're just going to rotate it around 90 degrees and scale it down. In fact, it's fairly close to the res, so I can right click, transform, and fit to comp. And so there's our metal there. And I think what we might do is just quickly put a levels color correction on it, and let's just drop the levels down a little bit. Something like that's fine for now. And what we can do with our texture, metal texture highlighted, is use the track matting options here, and we're going to alpha inverted matte. And you'll see now that if I bring the visibility up for my BG, that we now have those bullet holes punching out of the image. And if I hide the BG and perhaps go into toggle transparency, you can see that those bullet holes are actually punching out in the metal. Now we need to get them to read a little bit more like bullet holes. So to do that, we're just going to highlight the texture layer. We're going to right click. So we'll right click and just bring up layer styles, bevel and emboss. And straight away there you'll see that we've got some nice 3D reading, reading very 3D like bullet holes. We're just going to fine tune that a little bit, that bevel and emboss. We'll bring the size back down to probably about 3. We'll bring up the shadow opacity and the highlight opacity. Might just bring our background back in invisible. I'm just going to, it's looking a little bit grey there. I think what I might do with the background is scale it up a little bit more, move it down, something like that, just so that it's not so grey through the holes. And that's looking pretty good. So we have our bullet holes punching through there, and the next thing we need to do is, what I'm going to do is duplicate our bullet holes pre-comp, Control D, and just going to rename that to shine. So I'll just isolate that. We'll bring up our transparency again, and I'm going to create an effect using Trapcode's shine. So Trapcode, and it's just off screen for you, but shine, and I'm just going to reposition the source point a little higher, something like that, it's fine. And we'll probably, with the colorize, we'll go back to just a one color, and I'm just going to give it just an off-white, a little bit of yellow in there, and that's going to work fine. And I'll switch the mode to add, and now you'll see that as the bullet holes 100% to fit there, as the bullet holes come through, it reveals this shine effect. And I could probably increase the boost the light a little bit, not too much. You still want to be able to sort of maintain the holes, and might just go to transfer mode to screen on that and wind the source opacity down to 0. And that's working pretty well there. Okay, so I guess the last thing we can do, and it's probably lucky that we kept our CG Swot outline, is we could switch it back on, and we can come above the bullet holes pre-comp, and just with it selected, I'm just going to go Effect, Blur Sharpen, Fast Blur, not Gaussian, Fast Blur, and we're going to just really blur that out, just so that it's sort of roughly the shape of the holes of the text. And we'll go to we'll try overlay. I think that's going to work nicely. I'm just going to hide these masks with the toggle mask and shape visibility, and you'll see the difference there. And the idea for this is we're going to come back to we'll go halfway through just to show you what I'm going to do with it. Just going to bring up an effect of transition linear wipe. It's just off screen for you, but it's a standard effect. And if I slide through to say 50%, you'll see that there's a hard line there. And what we can actually do is flip the wipe angle to 90, to minus 90. And if we start down here at 0, probably start it, come in until a couple of holes have been made there. We'll drag this down to 100%, click the stopwatch to create a keyframe, and then when we come through all the way to when the T is just about done, and we'll wind it down to 0. We'll come through to halfway and just fix up the feather, just wind the feather right out. And what that leaves us with is just sort of a lighting effect coming through. It's just going to, we could probably give it a little bit more feather and a little bit more blurriness. And that just helps sell the effect that we're in sort of a darker sort of void, and then the bullet holes are causing that void to light up a little bit more. We'll bring that feather down a little bit more. About 70, 75 looks pretty good. Okay, that seems to be working fairly nicely. Only I think what's happening, if I toggle that on and off, yeah, see what's happening there. We're getting brightness on the holes there. So I think what I might do is just duplicate the bullet holes pre-comp, Control D, drag it above that. We can rename this to sort of a glow light effect. And this bullet holes pre-comp here, we're going to invert the alpha matte there. And that just means that the holes themselves aren't going to be sort of blown out. We'll just make sure that that's working okay by bringing up the background only and that glow effect. Yeah, you can see that it's punched out the holes, and that way we can guarantee that it's not going to blow out anything that it shouldn't. Okay, so that's looking pretty good. And what we can do now is, in our project window, we can drag that bullet effect down onto a new composition button, and we're going to rename it master output. And this is where you would lay in your sound effects. I had sound effects in my original, and they were very easy to find online. Just some ricochet noises and a machine gun. I just sort of looped them out a little bit. Really wasn't the main aim for the tutorial, so I didn't spend a lot of time on it. But what we need to do is give this a little bit of color treatment. And what we can do is create a new adjustment layer. And the first thing I like to do is give it a little bit of ethereal feel to it. And what I mean by that, I'll show you what I mean by that. And with the adjustment layer selected, I'm just going to bring up a effect, blur, sharpen, fast blur. I'm going to give it about 12. Repeat on edges, and it blurs the whole image. But if we switch the mode to a screen mode type, and then just bring up T for opacity, just knock that back to 50%, and that's just going to give it a little bit of a glow in the lighter sections. And what we can also do is, I'll show you a very quick and easy way to sort of control that a little bit more. Get rid of that adjustment layer, duplicate your your bullet effect, Control D, hide the bottom one, and just with the top one selected, we're just going to bring up our color correction levels. We're going to really crunch out the bright areas, the dark areas, so that only the bright areas are sort of just visible. The dark areas are going to drop into black, and that's looking pretty good. And you can see there now that we're getting something like that. And now if we highlight that layer and use the blur sharpen fast blur, give it a 12, repeat on edges and switch that to screen, and then bring up our underlying effect. What that means is that it's concentrated that blur effect. We can probably increase that a little bit, maybe 15 on the blur. It's concentrated that blur effect really on the bright areas and not on the entire image, which is what that adjustment layer would have done. So it's working pretty nicely there now, and I'm just going to give it one curves adjustment. So just new adjustment layer, bring up your curves, color correction and curves effect, and I'm just going to give it a little bit of contrast. Just crunch it down a bit. Just give it a nice little contrast S-curve. Whoop. Something like that. Looks fine. We're getting a very nice looking process there. Now you will see if I come to the top here, just drag it down, we're getting a bit of a lip around the edge, and that's a result of the back in the bullet effect here. You can also see it in here. It's a result of the texture layer having a emboss, and it's actually embossing the whole thing, not just the hole. So it's a really easy fix. You can grab both of these layers here now and just bring up S for scale and punch in, say, 101. Let's make it 102 in the scale, and that just gets rid of that edge on the outside, and that's going to work nicely. So if I just bring this out of the road, give it a bit of a RAM preview, we'll see what that's looking like. So that's a pretty simple process, but we covered some very powerful tools there, especially in relation to extrapolating a mask shape and baking it into the position of something. Now that position in this instance is an emitter, but that could also be the position of an object or text or some sort of motion graphic moving around. And so you'll see that it's a very powerful process indeed. And so there's our bullet hole effect, and quite easily put together. So experiment with that process and have a bit of a play, especially with that extrapolating that data out of the mask. And hope you've enjoyed this tutorial. Until next time, bye for now.